Right, so it's now been recorded. Okay, well, as Ruth said earlier, there's one or two of you, Ruth I know at least has probably seen this talk before, and Ruth says she knows the ending, so I might have to think of a different ending before we get there. So I do know one or two people have seen this before. I put this talk together probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, I think at least, to give to the Works with Rotary Club. And I think I've since done it for the Twinning organisation and one or two other groups as well. And I got the idea originally from seeing similar talks on bird migration at certainly the local Derby RSPB group, one or two other places as well. So I just got the idea to put together a talk initially for our Rotary Club, and it kind of grew from there. I'll share the screen in a second with my slides. Just to acknowledge before I do this that quite a lot of the photos in the presentation are mine. There's a few that I've borrowed. So with grateful thanks to organisations like the RSPB, the BTO, British Trust for Ornithology, and the various wildlife trust organisations as well. So you'll be able to spot my photos from some of the quality and the graininess, where they've been heavily cropped and blown up. So yeah, so there is material drawn from a variety of sources to put this together. So if I share my screen. So can you all see my screen now? If you share, yeah, great stuff. Yeah, so this is all about bird migration, which is, it's one of the most wonderful things in the natural world, and it's kind of happening all the time around us. And because they're birds flying and so on, it's one of the easiest natural wonders, phenomena to observe. And I think there's been lots of talk about how people in lockdown have got closer to nature. And I think one of the things that there's a lot more people who are interested in nature of all kinds, but particularly birds, the opportunity to see birds in your garden, and just the walks that we've been doing in lockdown. You can actually see the effects of birds migrating, because they've been doing this all the time. We've been shut away in our houses. So that's still happening all around us. One of the things about bird migration is actually there's so much that we don't yet know. We're finding out more all the time with advances in technology, particularly things like satellite technology. And we'll talk some more about that as we go through. So we'll have a look at different solutions. We'll obviously summer visitors, which are arriving all the time now. We'll talk about winter visitors. We'll look at why birds migrate in the first place. How do they do it? And there's an awful lot of this which is still not clearly understood. Which routes they follow, and how do we actually track them? How do we know where they go? And some other types of migration as well, because not every bird follows what you might think is a conventional north-south migration route. So why do birds migrate in the first place? Well, it is all about survival. It's about food, basically. Because if you were no more than something like 4 or 5 inches long, and weighing about, I don't know, 15 grams or so, you would not undertake a journey of thousands of miles unless you really had to, because there's all sorts of dangers that will happen along the way. There's obviously the weather conditions, the chances of you being eaten by a predator are quite high. Certain parts of Europe, there's chances of you being shot. So birds will not undertake this lightly. So I took this picture at Bempton Cliffs, if you know it, on the North Yorkshire coast near Flamborough Head. So these are actually juvenile swallows, obviously waiting for their parents to come and feed them. But I just thought the fact they're sitting on that sign, it was just kind of very, very fitting. So when we think of migrating birds, the tendency, I suppose, is to think of summer visitors. We naturally think of summer visitors. You've just seen a couple of pictures of swallows. They're one of the kind of iconic migrating birds, you know, signs of summer. I think allegedly the phrase "one swallow does not a summer make" was attributed to Aristotle. So it kind of goes back some time to when people first thought that, you know, birds like swallows, which are very visible, they're not here throughout the year. So where do they go to? So people have been kind of pondering the thoughts of migration for some time. So summer visitors, some statistics here on the numbers in the UK. So these all relate to numbers across the UK. And it might surprise you to find out that the most numerous summer visitor we have in the UK is actually the willow warbler. Now, with summer visitors, all the surveys that are done by people like the BTO, the RSPB, they will count summer visitors typically in breeding pairs or territories. There's probably one very good reason for that, is that the male birds sing to proclaim a territory. They sing to attract a mate, so they're kind of easily countable. So we tend to think of summer visitors by their numbers of breeding pairs. So if you look at those numbers there, what that means in simple terms is you've got ×2 for each of them. So if you can make the kind of generalization that for every male bird there will be a female, that means there are getting on for 5 million willow warblers in the UK. Willow warblers are around us now. There've been some, I think there's some singing. I think Natalie, who's not on the call tonight, I know she heard some on the meadows. There's definitely some singing around Carsington. So they have this lovely descending kind of cadence. Is their song very kind of distinctive. Blackcaps and chiffchaffs are all around us as well. Chiffchaffs have that kind of monotonous chiff chaff chaff chiff chiff chaff song. As warblers go, they are very unmelodic, and just let Kath into the meeting room. So yeah, lots of different summer visitors. There are so many not mentioned on this slide. One of the common themes of our summer visitors is that they are pretty much all insect eaters. There are a few kind of notable exceptions, things like ospreys, which of course eat fish. That's a summer visitor. There are one or two others that their diet is slightly different, but by and large, all our summer visitors come here to eat insects. And as we all know, many types of insects in the UK are in decline, and this is having a real knock-on effect on many of our birds, not least of which, of course, things like swallows, house martins, swifts, and so on. But it's having a real knock-on effect, the lack of food when they get there. Things like willow, most of these birds all breed either in winter in summer in southern Europe or North Africa or south of the Sahara, and travel thousands of miles to get here. Now, you might think that Africa is full of insects, so why on earth would you come to Northern Europe, where it's as cold as it has been the last couple of days, to spend your summer? And again, it's down to survival, it's down to food, because there's too much competition for them to stay in Africa, where they've spent the winter feeding. So they will come here to find food, and also, of course, to find food for their young when they get here. we'll talk about swifts in a few minutes, because obviously there's been other talks. I think that certainly the Wildlife Trust held a swift talk recently. They are in big decline in the UK. One of the problems, not just lack of insects, is they typically like to nest around human habitation, buildings, houses. And as we know, where we've all changed the design of our houses to have PVC soffits and fascias in our roofs, they've got nowhere to nest. So the lack of nesting sites for swifts has been a real problem, which is why there's a lot of publicity around modern houses which are being built with inbuilt nest boxes. And I know at least Katie on the call tonight, you've got a nest box at the back of your house, so hopefully you'll get swifts coming. Because one of the most iconic birds of summer is the cuckoo. Now, I can't see you all on the call from my screen, but I don't know if anybody, when was the last time anybody heard a cuckoo sing around Wirksworth? I don't know, it's probably quite some time ago, I imagine. They are around in Derbyshire. One of the places I've heard them and seen them actually a couple of times is up at the top of Padley Gorge. So at the moorland where you come out at the top of Padley Gorge is a good place for cuckoos. So they can be found around there. But cuckoos have been declining seriously in the UK in recent years. So we'll come on to that a bit later. Interestingly, although they've declined seriously in England, they're actually doing quite well in other parts of the UK, like Scotland. So it's really strange. In England, they're really declining. Cuckoos, of course, another harbinger of spring. Very famously, people have been writing letters to the Times. I don't know if they still do that, actually. Maybe they email it nowadays. So the tradition of writing a letter to the Times when you hear your first cuckoo, that's been going on for about 100 years or so, apparently. Swifts, yeah, we talked about swifts. These, oops, let's go back one. So swifts, as I say, they are in serious decline in the UK for the reasons we talked about. One is food source, one is lack of nesting sites. When I first put this presentation together about 3 years ago, at least, the number of breeding pairs as shown by the RSPB was something like 70 odd thousand, and it's now 50 odd. So it's gone down that much in the last few years. So just a look at, let's try and get rid of this screen at the top. Can those of you watching, seeing my screen, can you see the black line at the top of my screen? Control bar. No, okay, that's good. It's just getting in my way then. So some of our summer visitors then. Willow warbler, as I say, willow warbler is actually surprisingly our most numerous summer visitor in the UK. Now, many of you have perhaps never seen willow warblers. Now the leaves are starting to come out in trees, are kind of getting harder to see, but you can hear them sing, which is good. So they do have this very lovely descending kind of cadence of a song. They look incredibly like a chiffchaff. So if you see one that looks like that, it could well be a chiffchaff or a willow warbler. And the only way you'll really tell the difference is if they sing. So you can tell them apart. Chiffchaffs apparently have black legs. Willow warblers have much paler legs, but you'll never ever get as good a view really to see them most typically. Blackcaps are quite familiar. They're often out singing. Obviously the male has the black head, hence the name. Females have a kind of more brown, rusty brown head. Interestingly, blackcaps, along with chiffchaffs, you can now find them overwintering in the UK far more frequently. So we had a pair of blackcaps in our garden over the winter. these are not the same birds as our summer visitors. These are birds which are coming from Northern Europe, and they decide to winter here because of our milder climate. So, you know, obviously we're thinking about climate change, and birds are a big barometer of what's happening with climate change. If you go back, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so, you would very rarely see blackcaps and chiffchaffs here in the winter. But they are becoming an increasingly common sight now, to find them in your gardens in the winter. Two birds at the bottom are commonly seen, well, I'd say commonly, ringoozles aren't, but they can be found around Derbyshire. So pied flycatchers, they nest in leewoods. They also nest in Padley Gorge. Pied flycatchers will take to nest boxes readily. So if you go to both of those locations, you'll find nest boxes on the tree trunks. So a good place to find pied flycatchers is to just stand around for a while and watch the nest boxes, because you will see the males and the females. That's the male with the black and white smart plumage. Females are a bit duller, more browny coloured, but you will see them certainly at Padley Gorge and also at Leewoods. Ringoozles, much less common. They are like a moorland version of a blackbird, really. So they're same thrush family as blackbirds. You can find ringoozles up on places like Burbage Moor, Stanage Moor. So they do nest in the Peak District in small numbers. So they can be seen up there. So those are summer visitors. Let's have a quick look at winter visitors. Most of the winter visitors that come to the UK are ducks, geese and swans in vast numbers. I have to confess, this picture is a cheat. So this is a barnacle goose, and barnacle geese migrate from the Arctic, where they breed in the summer, to certainly the north and west of the UK. So some of the Scottish islands on the west coast are fantastic places to see thousands of barnacle geese. This one was not a migrating barnacle goose. This one lives at Carsington. So it's a bit of a cheat, but it was easy to take a picture of it. But there are a handful that nest and breed at Carsington that don't fall in the kind of masses of migrating geese. Winter visitors like ducks, geese and swans are counted individually, unlike summer visitors. One of the reasons, obviously, is that they're kind of bigger and stand out, and so you can count them. And the BTO, so the British Trust for Ornithology, organises monthly wetland bird survey counts. And there's one of those done every month at Carsington. So all the wetland birds, including ducks, geese, swans, waders, are counted, which is how we know the numbers. And of course, it's also how we know if there are changes in their populations. So we can tell that from counting them regularly. So you might wonder why. So this is our house. So those of you who know where we live on Yokecliffe Crescent, this is the back of our house taken from Yokecliffe Lane one winter with a heavy coating of snow. Now you might think, why on earth would you come to the UK in winter if it's going to look like this? And the simple reason is because of our somewhat milder climate than the rest of Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, and obviously the Arctic, our waterways, our reservoirs, lakes, estuaries tend not to freeze, which means that if you're a duck or a goose or a swan, there's plenty of food to be had, there's plenty of water to spend your winter on. So there's a variety of different, so the swans on here are hooper swans. So Hooper swans will typically breed up in the Arctic in places like Iceland. There's also on here, apart from the mallards and Canada geese, there's also pintail, shelduck, tufted duck. I think there's some widgeon somewhere as well. So there's a variety of different ducks and geese and swans. So that's a very typical winter scene on one of our inland lakes. So some of the I'll just let somebody else in. Again, some other examples. Pink-footed geese, very common in vast numbers, migrating here. They will pass through places like Carsington, Ogston Reservoir, they can be seen there. Widgeon overwinter here in large numbers. Again, Carsington is a good place to see them, along with other waterways in and around Derbyshire. Same for goldeneye. Goosander is a little bit different. Goosander do actually breed in small numbers in the Peak District as well, but there are much larger numbers here in the winter. So again, Carsington's a good place to see them, as is Wyver Lane on the edge of Belper. There's always lots of goosander there in the winter. But you can see goosander are breeding in Derbyshire, I think in increasing numbers as well. So not strictly speaking, just a winter visitor. Moving away from ducks, geese and swans, looking at other types of winter visitors, fieldfares and redwings, the chances you may get those in your gardens. There's certainly, last winter they were in vast numbers in the fields around Wirksworth. I don't know if it was like a byproduct of lockdown and going out on walks more just around the town. But this last winter, I seemed to see more redwings and fieldfares than I've ever seen before. And it was probably simply because I had more chance to go out walking. So lots of those around, and you occasionally you'll certainly see them around your garden, certainly fieldfares. Bramblings, closely related to a chaffinch, and they're chaffinch sized. In winter flocks of chaffinches, it's good to have a look at them closely and see if you can pick out bramblings. Again, we've, not this last winter, we've had bramblings in our back garden here in small numbers. They breed in Scandinavia, Northern Europe, Northeastern Europe, but come here for the winter. Snow buntings are incredibly rare inland. There was one at Carsington this last winter, but you are more likely to find snow buntings on the coast in the winter. So good places to find them, places like Spurn Point, Gibraltar Point, the Norfolk coast are good for snow buntings, but they're another small winter visitor. And the other thing that the UK is, I suppose, famous for, in fact, the UK is it should be said, the UK is internationally famous for its mud. So we have vast amounts of mud all around our estuaries. So if you think of the big estuaries like the Humber, the Wash, the Severn, the Dee, places like that, vast number of wintering waders come here. Many of them breed up in the Arctic and sort of northern end of Scandinavia, and come here for the winter, again, simply for the food. So on the picture here, there are some bartail godwits and also some knots, and I think there's one or two dunlin in there as well. So vast flocks of waders can be found certainly on the coast. Carsington and Ogston reservoirs are also good places to find some. So this last winter, there were numbers of snipe there. You can usually see curlews. Quite a few different waders in the winter will turn up. So this is the kind of scene that you will often see with thousands and thousands literally filling the sky. Those are all knot, and there's just thousands of them that just move around in great swathes across the sky. And fantastic time to watch them is when the tide is coming in, because as the water comes in, the birds have to retreat. So they're following the shoreline, really. So the good thing is if you do it when the tide is coming in, you will get them coming closer and closer to you. So that's the best time to go to estuaries, is have a look at the tide tables and time your visit if you can. So how do birds navigate? This is where there's so much that's probably not known, and there's so much that it's kind of supposition, things we're finding out all the time. But what we do know is birds will use a variety of means to navigate. There's the sun, obviously the stars. There might be certain landscape features like coastlines, rivers, and also using the Earth's magnetic field to navigate as well. The many small birds, in fact, possibly most small birds, will navigate and migrate at night. And the reason they do this is a couple of reasons. One is the air is stiller, the atmosphere is stiller. There's actually less energy required to fly at night than there is during the daytime. And the other reason is things that might kill them, like predators like sparrowhawks and various other birds of prey, they're typically not around at night time. So many small birds will migrate at night. Most larger birds, which require thermals to make flying more easier, will go by day. So things like ospreys, other larger birds that will prefer to spend less energy so they can use the suns and thermals. So birds do follow, by and large, unless they're lost, preset migration routes, or a number of certain migration routes. So if you look between Europe and Africa, there are some well-defined migration flyways. So there's one down through France, Spain, across into Northern Africa. There's others across from Eastern Europe down through Italy, across to, what's that, probably Tunisia there. And then you've got birds from Asia that fly down through the Middle East. Now, what that means is you get incredible bottlenecks or pinch points. So if you imagine where Gibraltar is, that's only a few miles across the I suppose the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, thousands and thousands of birds migrate across that point. One thing most birds don't like doing is flying long distances over water. So they will avoid that if they can. And so that's why they follow those flyways where there's the least amount of water crossing possible. For some birds, it's quite well known where they go to in our winter. So the map on the right-hand side is for swallows. So most of our swallows migrate in our winter to Southern Africa. And it's amazing if you think about it, because obviously swallows aren't that big, but like many birds, the adults will often leave first. So the adults, having brought up their young, and the young have all fledged and are now independent, the adults will go first, and the young will then migrate afterwards. So if come around September time, you often see loads and loads of swallows on things like telegraph wires, all chattering away. The chances are that those are all young birds. Now, this is quite amazing if you think about it, because unlike certain species, certainly like ducks and geese, where family groups will go together and the young will kind of follow the adults, birds like swallows, they have never done this journey before. So their parents have effectively cleared off and left them. And they are doing this journey of thousands and thousands of miles, never having done it before, which is quite incredible. And the even more incredible thing about swallows is they will most likely come back to the UK, to the area that they were born in. You think, how on earth do they do that? because it's just amazing when you think of the size of, you know, the size of the birds we're talking about. But for an awful lot of birds, the young are not following their parents. It's just something that's inbuilt to them where they go. So how do we know where birds go to? How do we track them? One of the most common means is using bird ringing. And bird ringing has been something that's been going on in the UK since probably the early 1900s. So there's something like 3,000 trained ringers. Now this is a very skilled thing to do. You have to be trained. You can't just catch a bird yourself and attempt to stick a ring on it. They are very highly trained and it's quite regulated, the whole aspect of bird ringing. So we can catch a bird, we can track things like migration, where it goes to, obviously population trends, how old it is. We can record how big it is, how much it weighs, all that kind of thing. And with many birds, you can determine its age and sex. If you ever get the chance to watch a bird ringing demonstration, they are absolutely fascinating. Because the skill of the ringers, and they, good place to do this is at Bird Fair at Rutland Water, where they have a ringing demonstration, and you could literally stand and watch it for hours, because the birds are brought to them in these bags, so they stick their hands in the bag and pull out a bird and go, oh look, it's a blackcap, and then they will talk through what they're doing. It's absolutely fascinating. There's one basic problem with bird ringing, though, is that you've got to recapture the bird, either dead or alive, to record its movements and to read what's on the ring. If you look at a bird the size of a robin, I mean, you can see the robin related, you know, in that man's hand. They're pretty small, and the rings, the metal rings that are put on their legs, are very small. So it's pretty unlikely you will be able to read what's on a ring of a bird that small, you know, from a distance. So you've got to either capture it again, or you've got to find it dead, basically. If you do find a ring bird, or a bird with a ring on it, if you go on the BTO website, you can actually record the fact that you found the ring. So each ring has a unique series of letters and numbers. So you could say, I found a robin, and on its ring was, you know, XYZ 1, 2, 3. And you will be able to look up where that bird was first ringed, which can be fascinating. There was a blackbird found in Derbyshire recently that had been ringed in, I think, Eastern Europe. So, you know, you can sort of get a little bit of the history of the bird that you have found. So how do we actually capture them? Most commonly nowadays, we use mist nets. And again, these aren't available on Amazon, so you can't just erect a mist net in the back of your garden and see what gets caught in it. These are used by professionally trained. And what happens is the bird flies into a very fine mesh, and you can just about see on the picture there's like pockets in it, and what happens is they fall down in the pocket. Now, as kind of harmful as it might seem, the birds are generally not injured at all. The mesh is very fine. The people who handle them are very skilled at making sure they don't injure the birds. So that's generally how birds are trapped for ringing, using mist nets. So the net is drawn across between poles, typically in a clearing like you see here, where birds will fly across and into it. Now, the thing is, some birds, notably blue tits, great tits as well, but they peck. So an awful lot of birds, when you see a ringing demonstration, it's quite amazing, because most birds seem to go into this like almost stupor, and they go very, very still and quiet. And in a trained ringer's hand is holding them so gently, the bird is totally still. Blue tits, on the other hand, don't like this at all, and will peck you. Now, I had a great story from, I think there's a bird ringing group in Sherwood Forest, and they, amongst other things, they teach students at Nottingham University on one of their ecology courses how to do ringing. And one of the things they do, this is very cruel, they get their students initially doing blue tits without actually telling them that, you know, the blue tits are the ones that will peck you. So they're poor students who are trying out their ringing skills have got a blue tit. So this is a young blue tit, which you can tell by its yellow head. It doesn't have a blue crown yet, but clearly it doesn't like the fact it's being held. So they will bite back. As well as ringing, so bird rings we tend to use for smaller birds. Larger birds will have different sorts of identification tags on them. So from the top left, you've got a redshank, which has got leg flags on it. It's got a ring on its right leg. Now, these are actually easier to see from the distance because, firstly, the bird is bigger. It's more likely to stand around more as well out in the open. So you stand a good chance of being able to read what's on the tag. Wing tags are often used on bigger birds. So that's a Caspian gull on the top right. The ones on the bottom actually look cruel, but they're not. So the neck collar kind of looks like it's strangling the goose, but they're not on that type. So that's a white-fronted goose with a neck collar, and then a tufted duck with a nasal saddle. So no, with the nasal saddles look particularly harsh, but they are put through. Ducks have like a hole going through the top of their bills, and it's kind of put through there. So they don't hurt at all, and it doesn't stop them from feeding. It doesn't go right, it's not wrapped around their bill, so they can feed. So we talked about how do we know where birds go, and how do we record the fact. There's loads and loads of things which is impacting our migrating birds. Obviously, climate change is one. One of the things we're finding with climate change is because most of these birds are insect eaters, you will find that they are often arriving in the UK either before or after the insects that they prefer to eat are out in large numbers, often before. So birds that arrive here in March time, like chiffchaffs do, sand martins do, and if we are having a particularly cold spring when there aren't many insects around, there's not a lot of food for these birds. So that is having an impact. There's becoming more of a mismatch between the bird's migration pattern and the insects that they can eat. The other major thing, of course, is loss of habitat, loss of breeding sites. We talked about swifts and the lack of breeding sites for them. But it's particularly affecting farmland birds, so things like turtle doves, where their habitat is no longer around in the quantities that it used to be. Not just when they get here in the UK, but on the journeys as well, because migrating birds stop off all the time to feed. So they need quite a lot of habitat along the way to feed as well. And the other thing, unfortunately, that does happen, certainly in some parts of Europe, there's still a lot of illegal killing, particularly in some countries like Italy, Spain it happens, France it happens, as well as Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And that does happen, and that's affected large numbers of migrating birds as well. Cyprus is another bad area for killing. So, tracking birds using advanced technologies. As I was saying earlier, with cuckoos, we've lost more than half our cuckoos in the last 20 or so years, even more so in England. They're not faring well at all. So back in 2011, the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology, started to track some cuckoos to find out why and what was happening to them, and where were they going on their migration point. And what they did was they attached some tiny GPS trackers, which you can see one on the picture there on the back of the cuckoo. So they're really light, they don't affect them flying at all, to track where the cuckoos were going when they left the UK. So these birds were tracked, and if you go on the BTO website there, the tracking is still happening. So that map is a screenshot from the 14th of April this year with the 3 birds that were being tracked. So from the UK, they might migrate down through Spain, largely, west coast of Africa, and they end up in places like Nigeria and around the sort of Africa there. And what came out of this study over the last 10 years or so is the birds which were following the western route, so down through Spain, Morocco, Western Sahara, Mauritania, were faring an awful lot worse than the ones which followed a more central route through Algeria. Now, it's not known why, but the numbers of birds that were going down the kind of central route were making it back to the UK in greater numbers. So each year there was about 3 or 4 cuckoos tracked. And so the BTO has been analysing the results ever since. But that's quite interesting that it's not so much, well, it may be food sources, but birds are faring better that are following a different migration route. Now, you would naturally think that if you follow the coast, you might find more food and less harsh habitat than going straight over the Sahara. So if you took a straight line across Algeria, Mali to Nigeria, that's right over the middle of the Sahara. But those birds are surprisingly doing better. And the other bird that's been tracked is the nightingale. Again, nightingales have seriously plummeted since 1970. I'm not sure the last time that we've had nightingales in Derbyshire. But in 2009, again, the BTO started surveying what was happening to them. So they put what was called a geolocator on the back of the nightingale, so you can see how small. So nightingales are about robin sized. You can see how small that is fastened to its back. They don't affect the birds flying at all. And the way a geolocator works is it contains a clock and a light sensor. So it judges the bird's position in relation to the sun to determine where it is. So it's not using satellite technology as such. The problem with that technology was the birds had to be recaught for the data to be downloaded. So the map that you see there is for a particular bird that was caught again in 2010. So it was tagged in East Anglia, went down through Spain, West Africa, and then came back again, and that's how we knew where it had gone to. So there's been all sorts of advances in that kind of technology to try and see more where birds are going. But nightingales are another example of a UK summer visitor which is really faring badly here. So in amongst all the migrating birds, there are some very famous long distance travelers. And one of them is probably the Arctic tern, probably one of the most famous. Last week, there were actually there were at least 20 or so Arctic terns flew through Carsington. And I think the number was even higher. So they're on their journey north. So these birds make an incredible round trip from their breeding grounds in the Arctic, Greenland, Iceland, some breed in the UK. So the Farne Islands, where I took this picture, they breed in the UK on the Farne Islands off the Northumberland coast. If you haven't been to the Farne Islands, if you do go, the Arctic terns breed right by the path that you get off on one of the boats, and they will attack you. So you have to wear hats because they just come and peck your heads. So they are very aggressive. But they make an incredible round trip. And there's a famous story, apparently. You've probably all heard of the Derby Cathedral Peregrine nest site, which has a camera and everything there. And there was the remains of an Arctic tern found on the peregrine's nest on Derby Cathedral, and it had been ringed. So this bird, this Arctic tern, because we could tell from its ring on its leg where it was first ringed, this bird had flown the best part of 1 million miles in 's life to and from the Antarctic, and it ended up being eaten by the Derby Cathedral peregrine, which is a sort of, I suppose, a not very fitting end for the poor thing, but yeah, that's what happened to it. So yeah, fantastic travellers from north to south, the Arctic terns. So when do birds migrate? Well, there's something moving probably pretty much all through the year. The main exceptions would be the midwinter months, so December, January, February are pretty quiet. So this is just a general indication, really. There'll always be exceptions to this. But in March, you will see the first sand martins start to appear. They're always among the earliest, as are wheatears. Chiffchaffs start singing. So you'll hear chiffchaffs singing all around Wirksworth. They've been here since mid-March. April, swallows and blackcaps start to return, house martins and so on, cuckoos calling. Some of our migrants do come later, swifts most notably, one of the latest to arrive. But from about June, they're starting to go again. So just when you're getting used to the summer and thinking, this is great, we've got warm weather, many of our summer visitors are starting to go. Cuckoos in particular. Cuckoo is another example of the parents go first. And as you all probably know, cuckoos are nest parasites. So once they have laid their egg in a target bird, the parents have done their bit. They don't have to feed their young, and they can just clear off, which is what they do. And the juvenile cuckoos, which have been nurtured and fed by some poor little thing like a dunnock or a meadow pipit, they will migrate afterwards when they're fully grown. From July, you will start to see the earliest passage migrants. So typically waders that travel through the UK from their breeding grounds in the Arctic. Others start to depart. Nightingales go early, swifts go early, and then through the autumn, things like swallows start to leave. But September and October is always pretty exciting because you've got the crossover period of summer visitors still being here before they go, and winter visitors starting to arrive. So it's a bit like March and April, where you've got the crossover time. November is really when the winter ducks and geese start to arrive in vast numbers in the UK. So throughout the year, there's usually something on the move that can be seen. So passage migrants, these are birds that mainly stop off in the UK on their way north or south. One of the good things about the UK is actually its position, its location in the North Atlantic. So birds that are breeding up in the Arctic and Iceland and Greenland and Scandinavia will come through the UK on their journey south to winter in Africa or Southern Europe. And they just stop off in the UK as a feeding point, as like a service station. So it's great because pretty much anything can turn up any time. So this knot, that was at Carsington in March. If you know Carsington well, that is That is the look at the watch area. I don't know what it's actually called. It's the flat area by the tower where the water control thing is at the south, at the Millfields end of the reservoir, viewing platform, I think it's called. And that knot was wandering around. There were some kids playing around on bikes, and it just was not bothered at all. And the chances are it probably hadn't seen a human being before, let alone some 5-year-old on a bike that was nearly running it over. So it was just kind of happily walking about and finding insects in the cracks in the paving. But pretty much anything can turn up when it travels through the UK. Now, some birds do what we call altitudinal migration. So birds that breed higher up. So if you think in terms of the Peak District, things like curlews, some other examples like skylarks, meadow pipits that breed up on the moorland, they will migrate down to lower altitudes in the winter. Curlews are a good example of this. They will often just go to the coasts because they can get more food. Obviously, in the moorland, that's not actually the Peak District, that is the Cairngorms, but you get the idea. It's a snowy mountain or snowy moorland, which if you're looking to probe the ground for insects and things, you're not going to be very successful. So they move down rather than any vast journey. Now, I didn't take this picture. You can probably tell by the quality of it. Some species, this is a waxwing, only migrate when they have to. And when they do, it's in vast numbers. So waxwings, which are incredibly beautiful birds, as you can see, will often in some winters come to the UK in huge numbers. And normally they migrate a fairly short distance in Europe to kind of milder climates, but they'll come to the UK in vast quantities when Europe has been hit by extreme weather. And that's what we call an eruption. So birds such as waxwings do it, hawfinches do. A good place to find waxwings, funnily enough, are supermarket car parks, because supermarkets have often been, their car parks have been landscaped with bushes around the edges like cotoneasters and things like that have berries in the winter, and waxwings will go for those. I've seen waxwings in Wirksworth in a tree in the Co-op car park, which bears that theory out. So, but you have to be very lucky that it's a certain winter for them. And I don't think this winter was. There weren't many here at all. Hawfinches is another good example. There were some hawfinches famously here a couple of winters ago in the churchyard of Darley Dale. For some reason, hawfinches like churchyards, and it could be for things like the particular types of trees that are often there, like yew trees, I think. So, yeah, they were in a tree in Darley Dale. Partial migrants, some birds that we think of as being resident will migrate in some parts of Europe, but not others. And things like blackbirds and robins hardly move much in the UK, but birds from Eastern Europe will come here in large numbers. So many of the blackbirds and robins you see in your gardens here in winter will have come from Eastern Europe. They will disappear. Blackbirds in particular, in the winter in your garden, you might see just 7 or 8 at any one time, all kind of looking for food and foraging. If you saw 7 or 8 blackbirds in the summer, there would be some serious fighting going on as they compete for territory. So most of the blackbirds you might see in your garden in the winter could well have come from Eastern Europe. Same applies to robins, same applies to starlings, which come here in large numbers from Eastern Europe. And Ruth, you can probably predict what's coming as you've seen the ending of this. So this is one of the most amazing sights of winter thousands and thousands of murmurating starlings. There are some brilliant places to go to in the UK to see these, very famous. Brighton Pier is one. Aberystwyth Pier, which featured on Winter Watch this year, is another. Somerset Levels is one. In Derbyshire, it used to be the case, and I'm not sure if it happened this last winter, up on Middleton Moor, so not the Middleton Moor that's near us, but the other one up near Wardlow, is it? So the other Middleton Moor was a good place to see murmurating starlings. We went up there in the snow a few winters ago and didn't see a single bird. It's kind of disappointing. But yeah, so there are lots of famous locations where you can go to see these. The story that I'm about to tell, which Ruth probably knows what this is. We were at Minsmere RSPB Reserve in Suffolk a few years ago in the winter, and they have large numbers of murmurating starlings there. And up on the blackboard in the visitor centre, it said 50,000 starlings murmurating from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And there was a lady standing next to me, and she asked the RSPB guy there, she said, how do you know, how do you count, how do you know there are 50,000? And he looked at her and he said, well, it's actually pretty easy. And she said, well, go on then, how do you do it? And he said, well, what we do is we count all their wings and we divide by 2. And he said it with an absolute straight face. And I was watching her reaction. She just did not know whether to believe him. But yeah, there are thousands and thousands of murmurating starlings. It's an amazing sight if you get to see it. And I think that is definitely my last slide. So if I stop my screen share, we can probably turn it over if anyone's got any questions or observations, migrating birds you've seen, experiences around Derbyshire.
I'd say that East Anglia in general is very good for murmurating starlings. Actually, the fen areas are very good to see. Seen lots of them there.
Yeah, because